All right, here we are. Hello, Facebook community. I'm here with Simon Mont today, and we're going to be talking about making sense of race, class, and systems change. So I've been doing a series of these expert interviews. Expert, I don't think either of us are sort of wearing that title with a lot of bravado these days. Certainly would not be appropriate. But we're doing these interviews leading into a workshop series called Free Yourself First, a journey of healing and action for white folk. And I'm co-leading this workshop series with Galen Logan and Wanda Whitaker, two amazing Black facilitators. And we're starting on August 8th. So if you're a white person watching this and you want to check out the work we're doing around healing and action taking, around anti-racist actions, let's talk. Come check it out. That's at racialhealing.net. So I'm here with Simon. Simon is a dear friend and collaborator, and he's a white man who I admire a lot for doing this work in a way that has a lot of integrity, a lot of depth, and I'm here because I want to learn from you, Simon. That's really it. I think you have a lot to share, and I've been wanting to talk with you about this stuff. And rather than sort of selfishly having a one-on-one conversation, I wanted to share this with the world. So to give a little more of your background and bio, Simon is a coach, consultant, and facilitator. You can check out more of his background on simonmont.com. And he's an alternative economies lawyer who engages issues of social justice deeply as they appear in ourselves, our workplaces, and our communities. He's facilitated gatherings about race, identity, and difference for more than a decade. And he is the co-founder of the nonprofit Democracy Network and a principal at Harmonize. Another line I love from your website is you say to shed the skin of broken systems and step into new ways of being, leading, and working together. And I love that. There's a way that your work encompasses such a broad spectrum of issues, from the energetic and the interpersonal, intrapersonal to the interpersonal, to systemic and organizational issues. And I also just want to embarrass you a bit more and read a testimonial on your website that I think speaks to how you've shown up in my life. Tamila Gresham, Managing Director at Teacher America.
Tamala.
What was it? Tamala. Thank you. Says Simon does incredibly thoughtful work. He knows how to reach, connect, and support people across many lines of difference. He understands how intersectional issues show up in everyday life and how to support people as they find healthy and heartfelt ways to move through the world. So I just want to thank you. Thank you for moving in those ways, for bringing your heart forward in this work.
Yeah.
And I'll save the rest of your bio for your website, and let's dive in. Sound good?
Yeah.
Great. So let's just start. How are you feeling today as we're diving in here?
I'm good. I'm feeling really, I'm glad we checked in a little beforehand and feeling myself softening, and there's a playfulness here in my belly too. And I'm trying to invoke that playfulness and softness in these conversations and make them enjoyable. So I feel good.
They don't have to be totally serious and heavy all the time.
The most important thing about figuring out how to have collective liberation is to be serious and self-imposing all the time. That's how it's great.
I love that. So I'm going to take a deep breath. This is a lot. And as we were sort of warming up for this conversation, we both reflected on what intense times these are. So I've been just remembering to breathe and to stay centered and grounded and like you, find some play.
Mm-hmm.
So before we dive into the meat, I think let's start with a preface around being two white guys having this conversation. And I'm wondering what you could say just to give context for what sort of the value of this conversation and the limitations that are inherent to us having this.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think every human has got least this is the way I hold it. Many ways to hold it, right? But the way I hold it is there's every human has certain limitations of their consciousness, certain things they're aware of and not aware of, familiar with and not familiar with. And that's mediated by all sorts of life experiences, race and gender included, are the ones that we mentioned. We're also probably going to talk about class, and I carry some class privilege as well. So that's it's shaping my experience of the world, and it's shaping my understanding. It's shaping even the way I speak. All those things are happening. And I think it's important, it's really important for us to mention it because it's also the case that the world, because of the identities we're carrying, the world doesn't always necessarily see that we are limited in those ways. It can very easily project onto us as if we are experts, or we can believe that we know. We can believe like there's energy toward, oh, there's those people are speaking. Those are the ones we are listening, that we should listen to. So if someone listens to this and doesn't listen to Black, brown, queer, non-male voices, then even if then we're inside the thing again, which we want to get out of. And at the same time, I think there's value. My experience, at least, is that there's things like anybody, certain people are going to connect to the things I say, and it's going to make sense to them in ways that if they heard it from someone else, it didn't. So, and we're going to explore contours of what's alive for us. We might end up exploring contours that are most like alive that resonate with white guys. And that's important. So I see like just presencing the value and the limitations and be present to the exploration, then maybe our whiteness shows up in this conversation. Like maybe white supremacy happens here between us. And maybe we can get out of it between us. That would be great.
Yeah.
And maybe we get caught. Yeah.
Thank you. We'll see.
We'll see.
We'll see. Yeah, I like how you frame that a lot. I know for me, I've been learning about anti-racism from a really wide variety of voices, including white men.
Yeah.
But maybe we suggest that if you're watching this, watch at least 3 videos by people who aren't 2 white men talking about this stuff.
I was gonna say let's just go for it. Bell Hooks, Cornell West, Adrienne Marie Brown, Angela Davis, Ta-Nehisi Coates, Ibrahim X. Kendi. If you haven't read something by one of those people, any of those people are great places to start. And a lot of what is about to come through my mouth is largely a function of my study of them.
Thank you. That felt really great. Like that. So let's
one more movement generation. I want to plug movement generation and the Just Transition zine. If I was going to recommend one place, if you had 1 hour, one afternoon to get a download, I'd go to Movement Generation and do their Just Transition zine. That's what
All right. I will check that out. I actually don't know that. So
they're on it.
Cool. Amazing. So, we're speaking to an audience with various levels of anti-racist experience, or, we're starting the conversation in different places. And I think no matter how much of this work you've done, going back to the basics is always helpful. So one of the tools or frameworks that's often talked about is the 4 I's, something you turned me on to. And I know you have a different take on it. So let's start with that. I think it'll be foundational for wherever we go.
All right. Should we share my little picture?
Yeah, please.
Okay, I'm not sure. All right, let's tech moment. Okay, share screen. All right, is it there?
It's there.
Cool. Yeah. So there's different people have different maps of this, but it's just a way of understanding the presence of racism or any other intersectional form of oppression, sexism, homophobia, ableism, but we're mostly in racism right now. In terms of kind of fractals, it exists on many levels of reality. So there are personal. I'll walk through it real quick.
Yeah.
Personal, impersonal, organizational, systemic, and collective and or ideological. The personal level is like my own beliefs. There's beliefs I have, conscious and unconscious, inside my mind. I have programmed like a nervous system level responses to people in different types of bodies. It's
Hmm.
like really an internal, intimate thing that's happening. That's the level of the personal experience. Then there's the interpersonal. So a personal would be like I have a certain belief of someone's inferiority. It's in there, personal. So if I dismantle that belief, I'm adjusting racism as it exists on a personal level. Then there's the interpersonal, which is we're talking to each other. So that's one-to-one or small group things. So that's the space of like microaggressions or prejudice or exclusion, some forms of exclusion, one-to-one things that are happening, that are hurting people. So if I can not do microaggressions and I can be more connected in an embodied authentic way with a person of color, we might be working on the interpersonal level.
Hmm.
Then there's the organizational, which is like you just think about a business or a nonprofit. It's the way that hierarchies are structured, where people are in hierarchies, how people are getting paid differently, um, different labor being valued, the cultures that create inclusion or exclusion and value and devalue that space. So if I were to go and identify elements of white supremacy culture inside of an organization and shift it, or if I were to change the compensation policy to be more racially equitable or reparations based, I'm operating on the organizational level. Then the networks of organizations group together to create systems. And some people go to talk about institutional and systemic, or they have different, or structural and institutional, but this is the way I make sense of it. On a systemic level, when organizations get together and network together to create larger apparatuses, we're in the systemic level. An example of that would be like the financial system or the prison industrial complex. Capitalism
Simon,
gonna
I think either you're cutting out or I am. Could you go back a couple sentences?
level. Did we get the examples of the systemic level?
No, I a little bit. They came through a bit jarbled.
Cool. So
Garbled.
it's systemic level. Organizations network together to create larger societal apparatuses like the prison industrial complex, nonprofit industrial complex, military industrial complex, all the industrial complex, or as a whole, extractive capitalism as a whole. Um, so if we were to, change policy levels or create alternative institutions, if we shut down the prison, if we block the prison's funding, redirect it to education, and within the education and community system, create a restorative justice approach and a police accountability board, we're operating at the systemic level now.
Hmm. Got it.
Then there's the collective and ideological level, which is there like uh is the space it's the space of like the kind of collective unconscious in a way. Sometimes it's collective conscious in a way. So it's a space of there's certain like archetypes operative about what it means to be a man, or what it means to be white, or what it means to be black,
Hmm.
that are filtered and consciously and unconsciously operating at all other levels. And then there's also the lineages, like the ancestral stuff and the subtler stuff. And the idea is pretty much that all of these levels create and are created by one another. Um, and there's different lines of causality between these levels. And the reason it's useful to offer, I think there's two really important like beginning observations that I like to offer around this from where I sit, which is one, to lots of white folks who are out there starting their anti-racism work, it can be very tempting to begin and personal and interpersonal
Mm-hmm.
is a great place. That's a place of, oh, I realize I have this inside of me and I'm gonna decolonize my mind and heal. Beautiful, necessary, all about it. And interpersonal, I long to be in right relationship with people of color and I would like to be nicer to them and create spaces of mutual belonging. Go, all about it. Um, and then but if we stay there, if we stay in those spaces, we never hit some of these other levels that are creating really harmful outcomes.
Mm.
Right? That's the level of enforced poverty that's happening at a systemic level. We're never gonna, no matter how nice we are to each other, we're not getting rid of racialized poverty unless we operate at a systemic level.
Hmm.
Um, and also, there's something that I think is really important to notice is when, especially if we are in organizations, when we try to bounce straight from the interpersonal to the systemic. Okay, I'm gonna be anti-racist inside myself. I'm gonna be in good relationship. Now let's change that system.
Hmm.
But I'm never gonna say, oh, the way we've organized ourselves in our effort to change that system is recreating racism. And often that's a location where we have a lot of stake because that's where I have my position in my organization and self-identity there. So it's just to be knowledgeable and flexible so we can expand our consciousness and action to be able to work together on all levels.
This is so helpful.
Should I stop my screen share or should we keep
Uh,
it there?
oh, I want it to stay forever, but I want to see your face. Yeah, let's stop the screen share,
Okay.
and we might come back to it.
We can always go
Yeah, I
back.
want to say it's so helpful because these issues are so complex, and it seems like the more we learn, the more complex we realize they are. So it's good to have that map so we can at least know what level we're talking at. Because you say racism, and I could be referring to interpersonal microaggressions, and you could be talking about systemic racism, and we're on in two totally different conversations,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there's a lot I could follow up on, but I really want to drill into this piece about white people getting stuck on the personal and interpersonal when we're doing anti-racist work. And I'm a bit guilty of that because that's my background. I'm a coach, and I love the interpersonal. You
Yeah.
know, it's messy, and I'll acknowledge that, on this free yourself first team, working as a white guy, a black guy, and a black woman, there's racial dynamics happening on the team, and we're unpacking them, right? And I'm having these realizations. Oh, I'm coming from white supremacy here, right? So we're constantly in this work of aligning our team with how we want to show up in the world and modeling that. Um, and I guess when it gets to the larger levels of systemic and collective, for me, there's a question mark because I'm not in politics, right, or government. I don't think a lot of people are. Um, I don't know if this is sort of a bypass to go right to action, but what are some sort of actions people can take to address such big issues like systems?
Mm.
And I'll say when we don't fully understand them either.
Yeah.
Is it premature? Are there
I'm
actions
gonna
to take?
I'll come back. I will
Yeah.
directly answer that, but I want to point to another map that's useful.
Okay.
Um, just the knowledge of we're all going to be operating and we all have different skills to contribute to each of these things. Your like Peter's superpower might really be about the personal level of anti-racism work with white people. That might be your superpower. So great, you know, you're Superman. Don't try to be Batman instead. Um, so I think there's something there. And one of the things that can be helpful, and but know that you're Superman and make sure you are friends with your super team, you know?
Right. Yeah. We don't have to do it all ourselves.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
think that's important. And one map that I think is useful, it comes from the Annie Institute, AYNI. Um, they talk about interventions. There's three basic types of interventions in the movement ecology. There's personal transformation, there's disrupting existing oppressive systems and transforming them, and there's creating alternative institutions. So we can do these different things, and that it's just important to acknowledge the use interconnection of them all. But as far as like actually operating at that level, it's just find an organization that is operating at that level and listen to them closely and see if they need volunteers, especially if that organization is POC led or BIPOC led. So it's like they're like, if right, I learn how to operate at the systemic level because I listen really closely to movement generation and movement strategy center, and I say, what are we doing? What, you know? But I think operating, like, it's easier to hit the organizational level, actually. So like if you're embedded inside an organization, start attending to the ways these things are showing up there. And then generally the way that we think about making change on an organizational level will start to inform how we can think about systems. So following BIPOC crews, learning about the systems level, and trying to move from interpersonal to organizational will help us helps the thinking get to systemic also.
Got it. That's really helpful, and surfaces some of this ideology. Like, as a white person, I have to come up with this myself, and it's so simple to say, just listen, follow BIPOC and what, who've done the thinking and the work and know what the priorities are, and just lend what we can.
Yeah, and I think it's also important I want to push into like what it means to follow BIPOC folks, because I think it's also important we don't view that entire community as like a monolith. It's not like, when I say follow BIPOC folks, I'm not like looking to the first person who looks different than me and saying, what should I do? Right. I'm like looking at the community that is self-organizing and identifying its own visionary leadership and organizing itself to uplift that leadership and rallying behind that, and telling us which leaders inside that community and there are many, are legitimate voices, and then seeing that and then saying, okay, now I'll align with those things. So like a great example is like the platform, like the Movement for Black Lives platform. That was like a big intentionally, like a big collective process that talked to a lot of people and then distilled something. Okay, that's there. And that's why I say movement generation all the time, because they also are really conscious about process and how they do. By the time they've offered something, that thing has been through hundreds and hundreds of leaders and edited through hundreds of leaders. And it's like, okay, now, in addition, and that's in addition to the more interpersonal level of like making sure I also listen closely to any voice that looks different than me. Especially if it's saying something that's making me feel uncomfortable or challenged, to really take it upon myself to like check out what's going on there.
Good. So helpful.
Yeah.
So helpful. So I'd actually like to hear a bit about your background and start with, what is an alternative economies lawyer? What does that mean, and how have you come to this work over the last decade?
I'm glad you specified, my background. It's like, well, what lifetime do we start in? When I was a window when I was a little child.
There's so many layers
Of my ancestors' thought. Yeah. There's I grew up in a pretty white area, pretty class privileged area. And for various reasons, I was, from a very young age, I was like both acutely aware of that and acutely aware of some of the dynamics that mediated belonging, exclusion, and access. I was, and was in some edge spaces regarding race and class a couple times. It made me even more aware. And felt a sense of claustrophobia inside of the fiction of whiteness. I didn't know that that's what it was until later, but like a real, like, oh my gosh, this is not the way humans should live. This is not it. Took me decades to realize that the thing I was reacting to was whiteness.
Wow. So at a young age, you had a felt sense of that, just not the language for it.
Yeah, middle school, high school there was the felt sense, and even younger, because of my family and their education and how they viewed the world to me, I was aware of what we would now call intersectionality, pretty young. Um, and kind of was determined to try to make it out of that and desegregate my life, which took many different forms. As far as, you know, kind of professionally, professionally, I was a school teacher, in a very racialized, very segregated environment. The lawyer stuff is I went to law school. I wanted to do anti-mass incarceration, anti-school to prison pipeline work. Ended up falling deep into like restorative justice and sitting in circles in communities and in prisons, um, and then and participating in social movements. And during my time in law school, noticed like, oh, the way we're trying to change the thing is recreating a lot of the dynamics that we're trying to change.
Hmm.
And we're inside of a lot of reactivity. We're inside of a lot of trauma. We're inside of a lot of stuff. And mostly, like it really happened when I was in the public defender's office. I was like, there's a war going on. There is a war, and if I'm going to be in the war, I'm glad I'm on the public defender side. I'm glad I'm protecting people against the violence of our criminal injustice system. And I really can't be a warrior. I can't be a soldier. It's hurting me. I'm really glad that people are doing that, and I couldn't, and it wasn't for me. It wasn't the place I belonged. And then I ended up at the Sustainable Economies Law Center. That's very much, how do we create new systems? There are people out there creating new economic systems. They're cooperative, they're commons based, they're BIPOC led, they're really beautiful things. And most of those things are pretty challenging given our legal structures. So their work is to help those things emerge by helping with the legal side of the problem. And that's made me come alive. And that's when I started working on governance inside of organizations. And then working on, if you're going to work on, you try to do organizational change, and you try to get an organization to effectively operate at systemic levels while embodying liberatory values. You learn pretty damn quick that you gotta drop in and understand how trauma works. And that's when I kind of brought more of the mysticism and the trauma push. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an amazing cocktail of different skills and interests that all come together around this confounding problem of how do we escape from this system that's really hurting everyone.
Yeah.
Hurting BIPOC the most, but hurting everyone.
Yeah.
Um, there's a lot of language in here, but could you paint a picture of what this looks like? If you could wave your wand, and I don't think it's necessarily your wand to wave, but just as a thought experiment, if you could wave your wand and have a picture of an economy that's sustainable and just, because I don't think I even have a reference point for what to imagine outside of
Well,
capitalism.
I don't know. Movement generation, just transition zine.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm poetic enough in the moment to paint that picture, but I can tell you what I would do if
Great.
you give me $10 billion.
Great. Here you go. Let me write the check.
Okay, if I had $10 billion, would focus on bioregional economies and governance. So currently we have arbitrarily separated governance along state lines. But when we think about bioregions, we think about the ways that nature itself is telling us the ecosystems that maintain itself. So I think what we would be trying to do on a macroeconomic level is create systems that enable self-sufficiency within inside of bioregions, not as much trading between bioregions. So if you were with $10 billion, I think what we would do is we would create in a bioregion a fund that was partially a charity and then there's a charity branch and a investment branch. And the charity branch, its endowment would be inside of the investment branch and inside of long-term bonds. So it wasn't recreating nonprofit industrial complex reinvestment and capitalism shenanigans. So you'd create that thing and then steward the decisions of where those monies would go. We'd anchor those in principles and values created through a participatory process run on a bioregional level with a particular focus to equity. So we'd make sure that people's voices are heard as we create those things. And then we'd create systems where community leaders who carried necessary consciousnesses and representativeness of different identities and different interests would be on councils that made decisions about that and were accountable to their community in specific ways. So essentially, this mechanism would be taking money from capitalism and putting it into the bioregional level. And if we wanted to get really fancy, we'd create community currencies based on each bioregion. So anytime the money came out of the macro system and went into a bioregion, it would get converted into the bioregional currency, and the currency would then circulate inside of the bioregion. So we're taking money out of the system and recirculating it on a bioregional level and not extracting it back out. So you can see on a macro level, what we just did is we're reversing extraction. We're taking it back and we're recirculating it. We're recirculating with values to reclaim Earth and peoplehood. And then on a governance level, we're making those decisions collectively with an eye toward equity. And then that basic
I'm losing
money.
your internet connection here.
Damn, that was a fun rant.
No, I got most of it.
Yeah.
It blew my mind and it blew up the internet, apparently. Yeah, what you're talking about, like, I'll be honest, I don't have a reference point for it really. I'm sort of grokking what you're talking about, and it's so far beyond the conversations that we're hearing in the news, and I mean this is out there.
Yeah, and I think it's important to notice, like we're talking about racism, and that was quick, like, hey, class. That was an analysis. That was an analysis that, like, guys, the solution for like my understanding of the energy I would bring if I was empowered would be a primarily economic solution. It's primarily a wealth redistribution, poverty alleviation, environmentally focused phenomenon that we just run with the awareness that if we need to unpattern racism while we do that, or else our new system is going to be just as racist as the old one.
Right. So let's speak more about the title of this conversation, making sense of race, class, and systems change. Because I hear it's about race, it's about class, right? There's sort of like this debate, like, oh, it's about one or the other, and it's obviously about both, and there's a lot of nuance there. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, I think it's all just I have a way I hold this that it helps me, and it's also one of those things that, like, it depends on the, like, each time we look through a particular lens, certain things are brought into the foreground and other things are brought into the background. Right now, our conversation right now, like, gender's pretty far in the background of the conversation that we're having right now. It's not, I don't think that's because it's less important. It's just because by putting this in the foreground, we see a certain thing.
Right.
So all of these, there's lots of things that we're not talking about that it would be valuable for us to center our conversation around. So with that preface, the way I understand the relationship between class and race and class, I would anchor mostly in an observation that, again, Ibram X. Kendi puts really well. To understand that some people believe that the reason we have racist structures are created by hatred. So that the causality is people are ignorant and hate people, then they come up with racist ideas, and then they build racist systems that have racist outcomes. And Kendi makes the point that historically that's false. It does not start with hatred and bigotry. Historically, what happens is there's an economic system that relies on the denigration of a certain group of people, the denigration and exploitation of a certain group of people. then in order to maintain that system, people create a racist idea to justify their exploitation. Then the presence of the racist idea infiltrates society and consciousness to then create ignorance and hatred and bigotry. So it's actually the systems level in his analysis, which I think is a more useful one for the time that we're in, more pragmatically useful. The system creates the need for racism, which creates the bigotry. And you can see this on a there's two really great, like great is a weird word, but clear places that we can point to this. Okay, one is Bacon's Rebellion. Bacon's Rebellion is a weird example because it is an example of cross-racial solidarity between black people and white people, but part of what they were united for was the destruction of indigenous people. So it's not something we really want to like uplift as yay Bacon's Rebellion, but it's a good teaching point. Bacon wants to unite people against the elite class. Bacon's part of the elite class. He wants to unite people against the elite class in Virginia. So he unites the black folks and the white folks on the sense in the ideology of, hey, you're the non-elites being oppressed by the elites. We're going to unite. And we're going to do this other thing. We're going to take power. Bacon's Rebellion, which included the death of a lot of indigenous people, was effective in its purposes, so much so that the elites got scared, and they got scared of the unity, of the class conscious unity. They realized we're outnumbered on a class level. If the class realizes they're a class, our power is done. So their response was to create increase racial division inside of the class. So they gave all like modest benefits to white people, extra punishments to black people, made white people indentured servants, black people slaves. The Virginia slave codes further this. And then they say, hey, white people, you're with us. So now let's make it about race. So white people, white elites and white poor people are now united against poor black people. So it's a game. It's a game to reinforce the status quo. And we can see that operating all of the time. Because if you look at a class consciousness, the people who are the white people who are disenfranchised by extractive global capitalism are impoverished as a result of the same thing, the same economic structure that black people are. And if they realize that, if we all realize that and realize that the thing that as a class consciousness, we are the 99%, so to speak, we would be able to change something. But as long as there's so much racism and division and we can't get our values aligned, we're going to continue doing this. And another clear example is just the existence of slavery. It's an economic need. There was an economic need for cost efficient labor, and people wanted that money, and they wanted that money, and they wanted the self-determination that money would get them, and they wanted slaves. So they're going to create an ideology. They're going to create racism to reinforce it, which is then going to fractal out into all these different types of trauma and bigotry and all this other stuff.
Yeah, this is really affirming of a lot of what I've been thinking about, and my collaborator Galen talks about Bacon's Rebellion a lot.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you two have a similar mindset that original template for, the white elite making it about race, creating this game of race to maintain power. It sounds like you think that template is existing today quite directly. Like we're living some version of Bacon's Rebellion right now. And if we only realized the game that was being played, it would be, I'm thinking about the Occupy movement. We'd realize that this is a 99%, 1% thing, not a black and white thing. So much. Is that accurate?
Yeah. And I want to play delicately with the binary between things.
Right.
And I would say, as far as that template, like, yes, clearly and objectively speaking, a good place to look is the Southern strategy enacted by Nixon and Reagan. And we can look that up. And I forget, my little Rolodex is a little dusty, so I can't pull out the names and the quotes at the moment. But that the Southern strategy that elected Nixon and Reagan was explicitly, they realized they were going to lose, and they realized they needed to get the white vote, and they realized the best way to do that was to increase racism. And that's happened it's consistently happening. And I would say a similar thing is happening with the populism, the white nationalist populism that we're experiencing today, right? It's people who are disenfranchised by the economic system are being turned against their potential allies, as a way of reinforcing, as a way of protecting the macroeconomic system. If we want to get deep cut nerdy, we can talk about anti-Semitism there, which is an essential element. We'll just pause on that.
Yeah.
And then as far as what?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
As far as the binary, I think it's like, yes, it's a 99%, 1% thing. And as soon as we go inside the 99%, there's different levels of urgency, and because of the way that materially the society has been constructed, our needs can be placed in opposition with one another. Mm-hmm. So if we are in a scarcity mindset and scarcity structures, there are oppositionalities that can occur. And then we are faced with choices of like, look, can we prioritize one group before the other? How do we do this? And it's really complicated. So I don't want to make the 99% a monolith. And I know you didn't mean to do that,
but of course. And you know, I'm being a bit provocative because I think especially as white people who are learning about this stuff, we really want to figure it out. We want to get our minds around it and keep looking for ways to make it binary or monolithic when the truth, as I began this conversation with, just gets increasingly complex.
Yeah.
And I think one of the skill sets is to be able to be comfortably uncomfortable in the unknown, knowing that we never have complete data and all of our actions and strategies are imperfect, and not to let that paralyze us or be a problem.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and to know that like if you were interviewing like Resma Menachem, who's a Black healer, you would have just got a totally different analysis. It would have started with racialized trauma and healing. And we haven't really touched that. So it's like everything is going to be partial. No one's going to know anything. And that's why for me, the thing that feels the most useful for me is these kind of making sure I get clear on a couple big maps, so I can situate myself and be like, oh, I'm interested in personal transformation and an interpersonal level. That's what I'm going to focus on. Now I'm going to go deep in that. And then I'm going to pick my head up and be like, oh, those people are working on organizational stuff. Let me go talk to them. Hey, is there any collaboration? How do you think these things relate? Cool. And because that notion, that need for the uniform understanding and that need for the right way to do it and the need for the strategy that's going to get us there, the need to know and to write that down so that we can teach each other and disseminate that is all aspects of white supremacy. And part of what's happening probably in the way I'm speaking even about it, even the way I asserted that, there's ways that did and will continue in its interpretation to reproduce. That's how nefarious it is.
Wow, thanks for calling that out.
Yeah.
And you know, this is your profession. This is what you've dedicated your life to. And you posted a video from Jessica Norwood on your Facebook timeline that I really enjoyed. And folks should watch it, but what I took away from it was basically saying, hey, white people, you're saying like, what can I do? You're not ready for that.
Not ready for that.
You're not ready to know what to do. Slow down, listen, and learn about some of these historical and systemic aspects to what's going on. So I think it's important to know that we shouldn't just rush into action. That's not helpful.
And I would say
learning some of this is good, even if we're not going to learn all of it.
Learning all of it, like learning some of it, and I do not think we can be an effective anti-racist ally without a deep practice of mindfulness and spirituality. I personally don't think it's possible. I don't think it's possible to do it unless we are in touch enough with ourselves to be able to regulate our own nervous systems in the face of trauma. And in the face of fear. I don't think we can do it. So I think that's kind of a non-negotiable piece. So the folks who are like, let me understand, let me learn, let me get the thing. like meditate, like breathe first. Because if you're in this, when we're in this thing all together, that's we're gonna do racism again.
Yeah.
That's this part. This is part of where racism comes from.
Hmm. Yeah, that urgency and drivenness, and yeah,
Yeah.
running from the pain. One more little thing that I just have to say. So I think some of my personal anger is towards people like Jeff Bezos, just to make it really personal. Like
Okay.
billionaires who are just reaping money and not really giving it away. Do you think
Yeah.
that's actually a big part of the problem, or just sort of an easy target to get mad at?
Um. I don't know. I like. I think it's an easy place. It's a nice place for our anger. Um. I tend to try to I tend to try to look to systems more than people. So I would say if you're mad at people not giving away the money, take a good look at the people who you think are giving away the money. Take a good look at Bill Gates and the system of the nonprofit industrial complex that lets him create a unaccountable shadow government that systematically disempowers third world people. Look at that shit. Um, Hassan Minhaj actually on Netflix has a good episode that breaks that down pretty well. It's for those of you who
I gotta watch that.
want to laugh while it's happening. Um, and I think we can't rely on those people. I think there's an ideology, there's like a dominant ideology that's like, let's get rich and then give money away. That's a problem. But yeah, I think that we should be looking at systems. So
Okay.
even the Jeff Bezos thing, it's like, I'm not gonna waste my time trying to convince just Jeff Bezos to do anything. We do need a different economic system that distributes wealth differently, creates different incentive systems, and creates different levels of accountability. We need a systemic fix for that. Um, but also some element of public norm setting via reintegrative shame. It has to be reintegrative in my mind for it to be healthy, which is different than core shame. Um, we can nerd out on that some other time. But anyway.
Brene Brown has a great podcast episode on shame versus guilt. I think
Oh
what you're
yeah,
calling reintegrative shame, she'd call guilt.
yeah.
Um, anyway, we're wrapping up here. We could go on
I
forever.
love this shit.
Isn't
It's
it
crazy.
great?
You want to be real. It's like because I love. It's fun to connect with you. It's fun to be in these things, and honestly, like there's a part of me that I really enjoy the invitation to think out loud. And there's a certain type of invitation, there's a certain type of space that gets created. Um, and there's a little love of my own voice, which you know. So
Thanks for
it's
admitting it. And
I might
I
as
think
well.
this is great because I'm learning a ton. I'm in my intellectual deep end of the pool,
Yeah.
and each of these conversations, um, I'm hearing totally different things, being
Hmm.
stretched in different ways.
Yeah.
So it's exciting. So as we wrap up, I'd love for you to talk about the 6-week experiment you just ran, with what do you call them, white resilience circles?
Yeah.
Yeah, could you talk about that and what you've been learning and what you're up to there?
Um, I've been learning a ton, is the short answer. Um, Essentially, what we did was we got together in small groups and created I don't know how woo we want to get here, but we created a space of like deep belonging, emergence, and a collective nervous system amongst white people. And then we asked people to bring deep vulnerability, deep listening, deep presence. And then we asked people to bring what was up for them around their navigation of whiteness and racism. Not a lot of content. We focused mostly on belonging and humanity. And while looking at whiteness. And it was incredibly powerful what we learned. Um, Not just content wise, but about what we need in our own humanity and how to be. So part of our practice was as white people trying to create a space of belonging outside of whiteness. Because part of why it can be hard for white people to divest from whiteness and break from it that's where belonging is. There's a lot of pressure to not challenge the norms of whiteness because you will be excluded and there's nowhere else to go.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Um, so we tried to create the other place to go. And not only was it another place to go, it was a place that wanted you there because you were doing that. And the best way I think that we've, on an energetic level, my best understanding of what we ended up doing was we created the field into which whiteness dissolves. Whiteness as mental, energetic apparatus. We created the field that that dissolves into so that it could dissolve and we could tinker and move towards something. And then we also learned a ton about how racism works inside of us and in our bodies. And I think our biggest thing that was like really for me was like, oh, this is dope, was we didn't try to do anything. We didn't try to act. And it created a place of safe haven and processing and belonging and humanity for people who are on their paths and accountability. So I learned about the power. I learned about the power of that, and had a lot of moments of myself noticing that my existence as a facilitator was recreating the white supremacist patriarchy, and then having to feel what it's like to try to get myself out of that position. I got a lot of gifts of moments of like, oh, I'm doing the thing. Can this group hold me while I try to not? Lots of showing up and crying and being like, I can't even facilitate this right now.
Oh, it sounds so vulnerable and rich. And that's the real deal. If you're not there, you're not actually doing the work.
And something I want to invite us to do is, if you're not there, you're not doing the work. And it's not work. It's not work. That wasn't work. That was connection. That was belonging. That was truth. That was pleasure. That was healing. That wasn't work. But this stuff doesn't have to be, oh, I'm going to do anti-racist stuff. It's really like, I'm going to orient toward becoming more whole and connected, whatever that takes, because I love myself.
Thank you for saying that. That's really how I feel. I think I call it the work by habit. And there is
It's
a
all in
certain
the head.
effort. There's a certain effort involved, more like right effort in Buddhism.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not easy, but play isn't easy. Liberation isn't easy. But for me, this last couple months of really engaging with this work, so to speak, has been incredibly joyful, purposeful, liberating, awe-inspiring, painful, humbling. A lot of words for it, but it can't be reduced to work, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's awakening. It's same as any spiritual awakening, same as any healing, same as for those people who, do psychedelic trips. It's like your psychedelic trip isn't all fun, but it's all meaningful and part of something really big and great and profound, even if you're puking in the corner.
Yeah. I have one something I want to share, an interpersonal that's just been painful for me recently. I'm curious what you have to say. As I get more invested in this work and I'm talking with my white friends, inviting them to engage, sometimes I get really frank responses like, that sounds too challenging. I don't have time for that. And the more I know about the cost, the idea that, if we're not doing this work, we are making things worse. If you're not an anti-racist, you're a racist, and you're perpetuating the systems through your complicity. It's super hard to accept that answer. And I think part of me is like, should I be more bold and courageous in making my white friends uncomfortable? But there's also something in me that doesn't want to just be like a bull in the china shop. That's maybe a little bit more strategic about like, okay, what's the moment? Pick my battles. Like, I don't want to alienate all my white friends. If they're not ready, they're not ready. So it's like I want to place a bet, and maybe I'm overthinking it. Do you have any suggestions for this sort of
timeless question?
I know.
I don't know. There's an option of that I would present that might be a fun pathway. When talking to white folks who are not as engaged in this as we might want them to be, I do think it's important to acknowledge the full scope of their humanity and what makes one available or not available in different ways at different times to do something. That's a real phenomenon. And it's also like everybody's got time. Like I don't know anybody who really can't do anything. So I think there's two directions that I see people go in pressurizing someone. And I think some pressurizing and some invitation is useful and beneficial. And I think, but one direction is the direction I heard you say, which is like, hey, like look at your impact. Like look at your impact. You're hurting people. That can be kind of hard to do because it tends their first direction they look tends to create shame and guilt, tends to create overwhelm, and they go and it's like, I'm going to help those people over there. So there's like, I don't know if that's always the move. There's another move, which is actually, white person, you're here on earth for a certain period of time. And I want you to be the freest, fullest, most interconnected, honest, truthful, loving and beloved version of yourself that is possible. You don't have time to do anything other than that. And part of the things that are hurting you in your life, including anxiety, fear of losing a job, senses of worthlessness, generalized avoidance of political circumstance, the grief attached to not being fully connected to your land and your ancestry, the fear of speaking to other people and the nervousness of having certain conversations, all of these things are separating you from your own humanity. And I would like for you to be more human with me. Like, let's go. You don't have time to do anything other than be yourself and be full and be healed. Is a different pathway. And inviting people in to that and then making it so fucking irresistible. Making it feel so good to be in that process. And I think that's part of our role as white allies, is not to make Black people make it feel good for white people, but for white people, let's make this feel great. Let's make this pleasurable. Let's make this fun. Let's make this creative. Let's make this caring. Let's make this that for us. And then this will just be better. This will just feel better than white supremacy. White supremacy feels like shit. So can we just do something better? And then people will be like, oh, I want to come to your party. Oh, I have to learn some anti-racism? Great.
I love this. So I'm with you on this. And what is the first book or podcast? I don't even know if I know the first resource to send to someone in this vein.
This video.
Okay, and after this video. This is because you gave me the trailer, but what is the movie of what you just described? Because I don't think I've read that or seen that yet.
It's not in my awareness yet.
Okay.
I haven't experienced it or witnessed it. I know myself and a group of people that some of the energy that what I just expressed is the energy coming out of white resilience circles. I know this phrase irresistible is I'm not going to be able to cite it properly right now, which I regret. But the notion of making the movement irresistible, or art making the movement irresistible, or what we have to do is make the new thing irresistible. That definitely did not come from me. So this basic framework is learned. I've learned it from sources. There's a podcast called the Irresistible Podcast, which is very complicated, has some great content, and it has been recently revealed that the organizational structure and operations behind it were recreating many of the things the podcast was trying to.
Right, I heard about this.
Though it's nuanced, but there's a citation there. But if anybody's got it, if anybody's doing this, let's talk and let's figure it out. Because
let's invite people to put in the comments, and as we wrap here, we do got to go. We've been riffing. How do people get into your white resilience circles? Are you doing another round? Just share a bit about how to get in touch with you around any of the pieces, coaching, consulting, facilitation.
Whether you want the individual one-on-one. So I do trauma repair, working at the intersection of trauma, social activism, organizational development, everything from strategy to culture to structure development, and facilitation, everything from acute conflict engagement to process work and community development. And then the the white resilience circles, they've really grown out of like 2 Facebook posts. So still the move is to go to simonmont.com, I think /contact maybe. Simonmont.com, there's a contact form, and you can just drop in whatever you're interested in. If you want to stay in touch with the white resilience circles, you can do that. Or you can message me. I'm probably tagged in this video. You just DM me.
Yeah, you are. Great.
Or email is simon@harmonize.org.
Great. And your website's brilliant. There are a lot of articles on there worth reading. So check it out.
Yeah, thanks for hanging with me.
Oh, this was great.
It's
You know,
fun.
and this is really fun. And I'll just share from my end, Free Yourself First begins August 8th.
So,
If you're watching this later, we'll do future rounds of it as well. And you can learn more at racialhealing.net.
yeah.
And it's shaping up to be a really, really beautiful program.
Yeah.
Collaborative and bringing in these different voices, coming up with a layered, community-based approach to our own healing and action taking.
Oh, yeah. May this be of service to ourselves and our own joy and our own liberation, and everyone who watches it be of service to their process. May the ways in which we inevitably fell short be forgiven and also taken as fuel for more learning and more healing.
Yeah. Yes. And we'd appreciate your feedback and your additions and thoughts, and we'll share some links in the comments as well. And
The movement generation.
yeah. Thank you, Simon. So good.
Thanks, Peter. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
you. All right, later.
Likewise.